Hello, today we will recap a movie based on a true story, in which a girl is captured in the basement by her father. She struggles and becomes the mother of many kids in her decades of captivity. Spoilers ahead, watch out and enjoy. Late at night, Sarah and her dad, Don, hurriedly take Marie to the hospital. Marie sits in the back of the car, struggling to breathe, while Sarah supports her. Suddenly, Marie's breathing stops, and Sarah urgently asks her father to drive faster. When they arrive at the hospital, Don carries Marie, and instructs Sarah not to speak to anyone before going inside. The doctors and nurses take care of Marie, leaving Sarah and Don waiting in the corridor. 20 years ago, during a family dinner, Sarah Cody informs her father that she's going to be late for a party. This surprises Don, because he wasn't aware of Sarah's plans. Sarah tries to reassure him that going to the party is not a big deal, but her father disagrees and thinks her attitude is the real issue. He grabs Sarah's hand and makes her sit down. Once everyone in the house is asleep, Sarah secretly leaves and meets her boyfriend Chris, who is waiting for her outside. They ride away on Chris's motorcycle. Back at home, Irene knocks on Sarah's door, trying to talk to her. As Irene keeps knocking, Don becomes angry and starts banging on the door, insisting that Sarah open it. When they finally get inside the room, they discover Sarah's bed empty and the window open. Don expresses disappointment, and calls Sarah a problem before leaving the room. The next morning, Sarah returns home, and as Don waits for her on the porch, he sees her kissing Chris before they say goodbye to each other. Don calls out to her, asking her to come in through the front door like a normal person, and reminding her that she can't just make up her own rules. Despite her father's words, Sarah ignores him and attempts to walk past him, but Don stands in her way, stating that they're not finished talking yet. When Don questions Sarah about dating motorcycle boys, and whether they've given her permission for it, she becomes angry and vows that once she turns 18, she will leave their house and they won't see her again. Feeling disrespected by her response, Don gently pins Sarah against the door, reminding her that while she's in his house, she must follow his rules. Sarah demands that he let her go, and just then, her mother comes down the stairs to inquire about the situation. While in bed, Amy talks to Sarah about her sneaking out, and wonders if it was worth it. Sarah responds affirmatively, mentioning that Chris told her he loves her. Speaking quietly, Sarah expresses her belief that someone needs to stand up to Don. She criticizes him, stating that he's acting crazy, and she feels frustrated that her mother allows him to dominate her. Despite Sarah's words, Amy warns her not to mess with Don. At that moment, Sarah's mother enters the room and informs her that she's grounded for a week. Annoyed by the punishment, Sarah swears again that she will leave as soon as she turns 18. Unbeknownst to them, her father is standing outside her door, listening to their conversation. Her mother offers her support, but also cautions Sarah against being reckless. After hearing the conversation, Don becomes unhappy and goes down to the basement. While in the basement, Don approaches the bookshelf and begins pushing it, revealing a hidden door to a secret room. 3 months later, after Sarah has graduated, she talks to Chris on the phone, discussing her future plans. When Irene leaves for some work, Don takes the opportunity and asks Sarah to end the phone call, and help him with something. She obliges and joins her father in carrying a large box down to the basement. Once they are downstairs, Don pushes the bookshelf aside, and Sarah is astonished to discover the secret room. Sarah asks her father what the room is for, and Don reveals that the previous owner constructed a bomb shelter, which he has since made some enhancements to. Once they bring the box inside the bomb shelter, Don inquires about her thoughts on it. Sarah expresses that she doesn't like it because of the lack of windows, and Don only tells her that's too bad before locking her inside. Terrified and desperate, Sarah bangs on the door and yells, begging her father to let her out, but Don pays no attention and walks away. Left alone in the room, Sarah takes a look around and realizes it only contains a sink and a shower head. She decides to open the box they brought down to the shelter, and finds her clothes and other personal belongings inside. Trapped inside the secret room, Sarah attempts to guess the door's security code 3 times but fails. As a result, the lights suddenly go out, leaving her with only the flashlight from her box. She searches for anything that might be useful, and notices a vent in the room. Desperate to escape, Sarah goes closer to the vent and calls out for her mother, hoping for help. However, unknown to her, Don is on the other side of the vent, and he quickly covers it to prevent anyone from hearing her cries. As the night passes, Irene becomes increasingly worried since Sarah hasn't returned home. Don reassures her that Sarah will probably be back the next morning, but Irene is determined to call the police. When her father decides to pay her a visit on the 4th day, Sarah hides behind a pillar. As soon as he enters, she pushes him out of the way and exits, only to be trapped outside the second door. She screams for her mother, but her father tells her that no one will hear her no matter how loud she screams. Don then snatches Sarah's hair and drags her back into the bomb shelter. She is adamant that he cannot do this to her, claiming that there is no air and that she is unable to breathe. Don explains that as long as there's power, there's air. 3 failed keypad attempts will turn off the power, including the ventilation system. Sarah takes a step back from him, wondering why he's doing this to her. Don only tells her that this is the result of her disrespect, and that everything she gets, she will earn. When Sarah doesn't respond to his question, he slaps her and pins her to the door before forcing himself on her. As Don stands outside the door, he observes his daughter slowly getting up from the floor, and witnessing her feeling sick and vomiting. Meanwhile, Irene talks to a police officer, expressing her concern about Sarah's disappearance, and stating that it's not like her to run off without notice. The officer informs Irene that since Sarah is already 18 years old, legally, she is considered an adult, and can come and go as she pleases without any immediate legal implications. The officer inquires if Sarah has a boyfriend, and Amy tells him that Chris hasn't seen Sarah either. As the officer continues his questioning, Don mentions that Sarah's bag and some of her clothes are missing. Irene confirms that Sarah had plans to travel, starting from Florida. The officer takes note of these details to aid in the search for Sarah. Sobbing and deeply upset, Irene firmly states that Sarah wouldn't leave without saying goodbye to her, especially considering her upcoming birthday. She is convinced that something is wrong. Sarah's frustration grows as the days pass in the bomb shelter. Sarah was depressed, and could only think about her boyfriend and their trip to Florida. Chris shows up at their house one day while Don is mowing the lawn, saying the cops called him and that he has something for Sarah. Don fabricates a story about Sarah fleeing with a man named Steve. He explains that Sarah and Steve were childhood friends, and she's always talked about running away with him after she graduates. On her 21st day in captivity, Don brings Sarah a foldable chair and a small cake for her 18th birthday. He hands Sarah a red dress and instructs her to put it on. Don then tells her she can request a gift if she so desires. She requests television, but he says she must earn it, so Sarah requests a clock instead, and he agrees. He then tells Sarah to walk towards him, and when she addresses him as father, he tells her to address him as Don. Sarah approaches her father, and later obtains a clock. After a year, Don gets Sarah pregnant. One day while cleaning, her water breaks, and Sarah gives birth to her first child alone, using the pregnancy book she has. When Don discovers that Sarah has already given birth, he tells her that motherhood will provide her with a sense of purpose. Sarah becomes pregnant again in her 4th year in captivity, and her daughter Marie stays with her in the basement. In her 7th year in captivity, Sarah has already given birth to their second child, and asks Don to bring Marie some medicine. Don, on the other hand, gives the kind intended for adults, which upsets her. She warns Don that they are the wrong kind, and could kill her daughter. Sarah insists that Marie needs a doctor, but Don ignores her and leaves. Sarah tells Marie a story, and sings her the song Chris wrote for her to put her to sleep. One day, Chris goes to Sarah's house in the hope of getting any news about her. He runs into Amy, who is staying at her parents' house for the weekend, and asks if there's any update on Sarah's whereabouts. Amy sadly informs him that they still haven't heard anything from Sarah. Chris mentions Steve, which confuses Amy. Later, Irene confronts her husband about the lie he told Chris. In a display of arrogance, Don dismisses Chris as a lowlife who has been sneaking around with Sarah, implying that lying to him doesn't matter. Amy, unable to hold back her tears, asks him if he did anything to Sarah, but Don says that all he's ever done is protect them. Sarah gives birth for the 3rd time in the basement, and when Don arrives and asks what the child's name is, she says they're calling him Thomas. Sarah massages Don, and suggests that he take Thomas upstairs, because there isn't enough room for the 3 of them down there. She tries to persuade her father that if Thomas stays with them up there, she'll have more time to care for Don. Don leaves Thomas on their porch, with a note from Sarah expressing her hope that her mother will look after her son Thomas. Irene discovers a baby in the bassinet and doesn't notice a small note. She calls Don, who pretends to be clueless about the situation. Irene shares that the baby belongs to Sarah. Unbeknownst to Irene, Don finds the hidden note and reads it. He rushes to the basement, where he confronts Sarah, informing her that he has discovered her message meant for her mother, indicating that she is being held captive in the basement. Don orders her to put on her red dress, claiming she hasn't learned anything. Sarah is pregnant again after 14 years in the basement. Marie decides to wear makeup one day, and when Sarah notices Don's eyes on her daughter, she tells him to stay away from her. Don turns off the power as he walks away, just to get back at her. Marie struggles to breathe because there is no ventilation system, so they must remain near the vent. Irene tells Thomas how much she misses Sarah. Thomas wants to know what Sarah is like, and Irene tells him that his mother is magnificent. On their 18th year in captivity, Marie and Michael become very impatient and tell Don they want to leave. But Don says they can only go if their mother behaves better. After Don leaves, Marie and Michael blame their mother for still being trapped. Sarah tries to explain she's trying to protect them, but they keep shouting and demanding to go outside. Eventually, Sarah can't take it anymore, and she starts breaking things while her children watch. She feels devastated, remembering the good times with Chris, and the life Don stole from her. Feeling remorseful, Michael and Marie help clean up the mess Sarah made and apologize to her. Sarah starts mumbling about Amy, and when the kids inquire about Amy, she admits that she hasn't been completely truthful with them. Sarah begins to share her story, revealing that she used to live upstairs with her sister, Amy. She explains that she had a mom and a dad, but didn't have a good relationship with her father. Sarah discloses how Don deceived her and led her into the basement before locking her inside. As Marie and Michael start to grasp the truth about Don's true nature, Marie begins to experience an asthma attack, likely due to the stress and shock of the situation. As the 19th year arrives, Don faces job loss, leading to frequent arguments between him and Irene about money. Meanwhile, Sarah does her best to keep her children content in the cramped basement, which has become their only home. During their 20th year of captivity, Marie, Sarah's daughter, suffers a severe asthma attack, struggling to breathe. When Don returns, Sarah pleads with him to take them to the hospital for immediate medical attention. At first, Don refuses, but after Sarah persists in her plea, he eventually agrees. They decide to leave their other son Michael in the basement, and rush Marie to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctor informs Sarah and Don that Marie's condition is critical. While the doctor discusses Marie's medical history with Don, Sarah remains silent, fixated on the clock in the room. When Don momentarily looks away, Sarah purposefully spills water on Marie's medical paper, causing Don to leave the room to get a new one. Sarah seizes the opportunity and bravely asks the doctor for help, revealing the truth about their captivity. The doctor takes immediate action, leading to Don's arrest. When Marie wakes up, Sarah shares the incredible news that they are finally free. At home, the police arrive and rescue Michael from the basement. The three siblings are joyfully reunited, and Sarah, Amy, and Irene watch with relief from the porch. Just then, Chris unexpectedly arrives. Sarah and Chris have a heartfelt conversation, where Chris apologizes for believing Don's lies, and not searching for her sooner. However, Sarah reassures him, saying that she has never stopped thinking about him all those 20 years. In a touching gesture, Chris presents Sarah with a new helmet, a gift he had intended to give her on the day he spoke to Don. After 2 decades of separation, the two of them finally get the chance to ride together again. So this was the story of the film Girl in the Basement, released in 2021. If you like the story, then do watch the full film, and if you want to watch more such amazing recaps, then do subscribe to our channel. See you in the next recap.